I'm really excited to be here with you all today. My name is Dan Miller. I do projects and programming for Slow Food USA. For those of you joining us for the first time, Slow Food is a robust international grassroots movement for good, clean, and fair food for all. And I'm excited to be here to host the third part of our three-part World of Pasta series. We started off with Pasta 101, then hosted You Say Pasta to look at the delicious ways to interpret one shape. And today's session is going to be really fun. I'm so excited to be here for Soul of Macaroni and Cheese to showcase the delicious impact of Black chefs on this iconic American dish. And if we're ready, without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our panel. We have with us today Chef Eduardo Jordan, who is a multi-award winning chef, restaurateur, and mover and shaker in the soul food community, who is also celebrating a birthday today. Happy birthday, Chef. And we're Absolutely. And we're also joined by Adrian Miller, a food writer, James Beard Award winner, attorney, and certified barbecue judge who lives in Denver, Colorado, whose book Black Smoke was just published last month. Congratulations. And before we jump in, I want to go ahead and thank Pastificio di Martino, sponsor of this event series. Since 1912, Pastificio di Martino has brought its 100% Italian high-quality pasta worldwide. Di Martino pasta has been made for 3 generations by the successful encounter of selected 100% Italian durum wheat semolina with the purest local spring water. The bronze dye extrusion and the slow drying process at low temperature help it fall under PGI Grignano pasta mark. The result is a tasty, healthy, and highly digestible product which perfectly holds sauces and returns the fragrant aroma of fresh wheat. And I'm about to have pasta for breakfast right now because I'm not going to be able to wait. It's almost lunchtime, and any time is pasta time. So I think I was also reminded that some of our counterparts are joining where it's already dinner time. So let's get to it, and I will pass it over to you, Adrian, and Chef Jordan. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so good to be with you.
Hey, Adrian, how are you?
I'm good. How you feeling?
Feeling real good. I get to hang out with you, eat some pasta.
All right. Well, I'm just trying to get on your level, brother. You know that, right? Cool. Well, before we get to your demo, I'm just going to give a brief kind of history of how soul food gets connected with mac and cheese, and just kind of give a little history, then set some context, and then I'll turn it over to you. So thank you, everyone, for joining us for Soulful Mac and Cheese. Just a moment as I share my presentation here. All right, so I'm Adrian Miller. I call myself the Soul Food Scholar. My tagline is dropping knowledge like hot biscuits, and I hope to do that today. You're highly encouraged to do social media, unless you have something negative to say, right? Then you don't need to post anything, right? Just give brothers some love today. All right, so the story of mac and cheese, at least in the English language, goes back to the late 14th century. So 1390 is when we find the first written recipe for macaroni and cheese as we would understand it today. And it was from a cookbook called The Form of Curry. And as you can see on the left-hand side, this cookbook was by the master cooks of King Richard II and then presented to Queen Elizabeth. So believe it or not, mac and cheese kind of started out as royalty food. And then over time, it goes down the social ladder until it becomes the commonplace goopy thing that we love today. But if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see the early recipe, right? It's just a thin foil of dough cut into pieces, and then you take some cheese and grate it, and that cheese would have been Parmesan cheese, and then you add butter. So really, that's the earliest recipe of mac and cheese that we find in the English language. And so over time, cream elements and other things get added. So today, when we think of this, is typically, macaroni and cheese might be a macaroni and cheese sauce. But when I think of soulful mac and cheese, I'm thinking of this. I'm thinking of like the casserole approach, where you got the not burnt, but you've got some browning on the top. and there's a fine art to having a lot of brown without burning it. And, mac and cheese cooks really know how to throw that down. But this is what I think of when I think of soulful mac and cheese. I'm thinking about Sunday dinner and a casserole approach. So how does this get into kind of soul food? Because believe it or not, there are older African Americans who believe that white people stole mac and cheese from them, just like rock and roll and other things. Now, we clearly know that mac and cheese is Italian in origin, but you have to wonder, like, how does that happen? So what we find is that in the earliest cookbooks that are printed from the South, macaroni and cheese shows up, but it's called macaroni pudding, and it has a lot of different things added. So this is one of the probably the most famous cookbooks, and this is the Virginia Housewife by Mrs. Mary Randolph, who was connected to Thomas Jefferson. Now, it was printed in the 1820s, but this edition is from 1836. But in this next slide, oops, sorry, I had my slides out of order here. Here we go. In this slide, we've got the recipe for macaroni pudding. So you can see you've got a half pound of macaroni, but then looking at the rest of this recipe, you've got eggs, you've got cream, you've got ham, you've got cheese, you've got pepper, you've got salt, you've got all kinds of things that are involved in this recipe. So you can see that macaroni and cheese was more of an entree, not really a side dish. And you see this recipe show up in manuscript cookbooks and other cookbooks printed from the South all over the place. So the Carolina Housewife, the Kentucky Housewife, all of these cookbooks have it. So the way that it comes into African American cooking is in a lot of these situations, enslaved African Americans were the cooks. Now, there really isn't an analog for mac and cheese in West African cooking because there wasn't really a lot of dairy and noodles and things like that. So this is something that was adopted and embraced on this side of the Atlantic. And so that's how it starts to enter African American foodways. It was something that they had to cook for other people and then eventually become something beloved in our own cuisine. And sorry for the jumping back and forth, but just to give you an example of a famous Southerner who loved this kind of food, we've got Thomas Jefferson. So Thomas Jefferson had a mac and cheese Jones, and he got it while he was serving as minister to France shortly before the French Revolution. And so while he was there, he took one of his enslaved people, a guy named James Hemings, who was one of the older brothers of Sally Hemings. But, we know that Jefferson had several children with Sally Hemings, and she was also enslaved. And so when James Hemings was 19 years old, he was brought to France, and Jefferson paid for him to become a classically trained French chef. And this was like a 3-year apprenticeship. So he spent a lot of money to have this guy trained. And then when he does, Hemings becomes basically the chef de cuisine at his apartment on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, right at the eve of the French Revolution. And so we know that James Hemings made a version of mac and cheese. It was more cream and more French influenced, but Jefferson definitely loved mac and cheese. He loved it so much that he actually ended up smuggling a mac and cheese maker or macaroni maker from Europe to the United States when he ended his term as Minister of France. And smuggle is the right term because Italians had macaroni making on lockdown. They didn't want a lot of people kind of mimicking the secrets of all that stuff. And so he went to great lengths to have his assistant kind of figure out how to get that macaroni maker here. And I'm going to go back a couple slides again. I'm sorry that these were out of order, but if you look here, this is on the left-hand side. This is actually a diagram of the macaroni maker that Jefferson had in his possession, written in his own hand. So the directions written in his own hand, and that schematic is drawn from his own hand. And so it was just something we knew that Jefferson loved. And he ended up serving it in the White House. So the gentleman on the right-hand side of your screen is a guy named Representative Manasseh Cutler. He represented Massachusetts. He was a Republican, and he was invited to a White House dinner in the early 1800s, and he was a serious diarist. So he kept a track of everything that happened every day, and he wrote about having macaroni and cheese at this dinner. Now, we have to say that Representative Cutler was not impressed with macaroni and cheese. He didn't know what it was. He couldn't understand it. So he asked the guy sitting next to him to explain this dish because he thought that the macaroni noodles were giant onions. And he just didn't know what to do, make sense of it. So the guy sitting next to him who explains this dish was Meriwether Lewis, from the Lewis and Clark expedition, a good friend of Jefferson. So we know that mac and cheese was served in the White House. Let's just go quickly through kind of macaroni and cheese trends in at least in soul food cuisine. So in addition to, standard iterations of macaroni and cheese, you've got what I call upscale. So this is the kind of the DIY approach, right? You load up your mac and cheese with all kinds of stuff like lobster. Here is a one that's almost like a kind of like a potato bar approach. Can add bacon, vegetables, all that kind of stuff. And the idea is to have interesting ingredients, be creative, and just kind of put your own spin on it. Another example that's really popular is vegan. So this is a place that I went to in Oakland, California called Solely Vegan. So moving from left to right, you've got southern fried tofu, vegan mac and cheese in the middle, vegan collard greens, and cayenne pepper lemonade. And so let's focus in on the mac and cheese. So at this place, because vegan does not have any cream, right? No dairy. So what they did is they used almond milk and almond cheese to make it. So texturally, it reminded me of stuffed tortellini, but very good stuff. But I'm seeing vegan mac and cheese pop up in a lot of places because you have cheese-like products that are made without dairy. And then another one that's fun is fusion. So there's this thing called soul rolls. So if you're not familiar with this, soul rolls are soul food egg rolls. And so they're egg rolls that are filled with soul food ingredients. So this is from a place in Denver called Cora Faye's Cafe, and she has a mac and cheese soul roll, and it's quite tasty. So you're seeing a lot of creativity and things like that happening. All right, so that is my quick tour of soul food and mac and cheese history, how it kind of gets associated with African American culture. And now I'll turn it over to the chef to give us a next level demo. So all yours.
Had to take myself off mute. Had to listen in clearly. Thanks for the history lesson, Adrian. Pretty cool. I think with mac and cheese, like I've eaten mac and cheese all my life. My grandmother and my mom, we cooked mac and cheese. My grandmother kind of made it from scratch. My mom made it from box ingredients, and there was never a story that was told. So it's always great and amazing to hear the stories that come along in the history lesson that wasn't shared before. So I'm going to walk us through how to make mac and cheese at home. Like I said, I grew up on some box mac and cheese. I also grew up on, the house homemade mac and cheese. And I think being that mac and cheese became so commercialized, meaning that you can find it on the grocery store shelves with powdered cheese and, processed cheese. Mac and cheese kind of gets a bad rap sometimes. And so, I think if we look at it from an ingredient standpoint, and Adrian had a slide of saying upscale mac and cheese, you can easily enhance and upgrade mac and cheese to be something that is more than just a side dish and can be an actually elegant entree or a nice addition to a beautiful buffet. So the ingredients that I have to make a mac and cheese, first of all, you got to have some good pasta. I'm using a penne pasta rather than an elbow macaroni pasta. I like the look of a rigatoni or a penne that has serrations or ribbons or ribs on the pasta that allows the cheese to actually truly coat the pasta. So if you want to grab pasta, always grab the ones with a little bit of texture on it, so that cheese can actually wrap itself around the pasta. I'm using 4 types of cheese here. I have an extra sharp cheddar. I have a mild cheddar. I have a camembert here. I have some Parmesan. Other ingredients include flour, butter. I have smoked paprika. I love the smoky note to kind of keep this vegetarian style without adding any proteins. The smoked paprika kind of brings on that bacon tone that you can really enhance the mac and cheese with. And then I have a combination of cream and milk, essentially half and half. This is equal parts, and this is going to be the base to our mac and cheese. Now, as I say that, I'm going to drop some pasta in the water. This takes about 10 minutes from the instructions on the bag. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out a little bit early, probably about 8 to 9 minutes, because I want to actually cook my mac and cheese in the oven to finish it off. So I'm going to get my pasta going while I get everything started over here. And so with that said, I have some other ingredients here too. I'm warming up my pot here for my butter and my flour, which we're gonna make a quick roux when you add those two together. But I have some smoked cheddar here that, you know, I can grate over the top. I also have some house-made bacon that I already rendered off that you can add in. I have some lobster, you know, so now we're talking about how to elevate a simple mac and cheese, and some chives of other herbs that you may have. Also, what I did is I reserved that bacon fat when I rendered my bacon. And so you can sub out the butter for the bacon fat, you know, if you want to take it next level. We're going to start with the base, and then you can do whatever you want to in the future when you're making your mac and cheese. You have a better understanding of how to make mac and cheese if you got the base. And I'll just kind of give you some tips and tricks that we use to make this mac and cheese work perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in my butter right into my pot here and allow it to melt down. I don't want to scorch the butter. I don't want to burn the butter. I'm simply melting this butter down, and I'm going to add in my flour as soon as I can get this butter fully melted down without any color. We're not making a gumbo. Gumbo, you get some color. We're not making an étouffée because you get some color. We're just making a blonde bechamel-like color when we melt this, bringing the flour and the butter together. So the combination of the flour and butter, it is classically known as a roux. And then feel free to ask questions. I think I have Dan there to help me get through questions if I can't see them as they pop up. So I got my butter and I got my flour together. Like I said before, you can use the bacon fat rather than the butter. And this is about 3 tablespoons each, butter and flour, okay? And once this comes together, I get a little bit of toasty notes to this. I'm gonna add in my cream and my milk, or you can use just half and half. This is about like 1.5 cups each of cream and milk. And so what I'm gonna do is dissolve that roux right into this half and half, and I'm gonna bring this to a boil, okay? And so the whole point of using flour in my eyes, because you can do this without flour. You know, you can, like Adrian said, there are gluten-free ones, there's vegan mac and cheese. The flour helps bind everything together. I know with a lot of like commercialized mac and cheese, there's other stabilizers and emulsifiers that allow like the cheese not to break. Some of the issues with mac and cheese, sometimes when you're baking it, it may break, and so the flour and other emulsifiers help it. And so like this is like the classic way my grandmother used to make it. So I'm following suit, as I say with a lot of folks. So as that comes to a boil, I already had like blocks of cheese and I already grated it. And so like, you know, mac and cheese is essentially a 15 to 20 minute process. I got my pasta going over here. I'm gonna give it a little stir to make sure it's not sticking. And then I'm just gonna keep moving forward. I got my bacon, and essentially with the bacon, I'm gonna cut it into what we call lardons, which is just like, this is, you know, thick slab bacon. And essentially what I'm doing is cutting the rind off and cutting it into like nice strips that I can render down. And you can do this in the pot, you can do this in the oven, you know, whatever is convenient for you. And I like doing it in the oven just because like I don't have to pay attention to it. It's about 350 degrees, about 8 to 10 minutes, right in the oven on a sheet pan. And what you do is you yield out some little strips. And what I did is I did not cook this down to like crispy bacon because like I want some of that meatiness. I want some of that unctuous kind of fat and bacon without getting like too crispy. Yeah. Do we have any questions right now?
We have one question asking, what were the 4 types of cheese?
Yeah, 4 types of cheese again. I have a mild cheddar. I have an extra sharp cheddar. I have a camembert, or you can use like a triple cream kind of cheese. And then I have the Parmesan cheese, okay? And while my roux and milk and cream is coming together, which I'm kind of making what they call a bechamel in the French world, I'm gonna grate some Parmesan cheese really quick on a box grater. I used a food processor to grate the cheese really quick, the cheddars, and you can do the same thing for all the cheese, or you can put everything on a box grater. Just depends on how much work you really want to do, or what equipment you have.
Mm-hmm. And we've also got some folks in the chat sharing about some of their favorite upscale additions, which include crab, truffles, shiitake. Yes to smoky cheeses, getting a little bit of that smoky flavor in there too.
Yes, I love a little bit of smoke in it. If it's coming from the bacon or coming from the paprika, or even like the smoked cheese that I have here. It's just like a nice addition. I guess I'm like always dreaming about like mac and cheese during the summertime when I'm barbecuing. So, Adrian, you may be able to relate to that, right?
Absolutely.
So I got my Parmesan here. I got my bechamel working. I'm gonna actually add my smoked paprika right in here. Get that all dissolved. Everything has already came to a nice, beautiful simmer. You guys can see that beautifully. I'm gonna add my cheese in here. Actually, I'm gonna turn my temperature down just a hair because I don't want to scorch my cheese because it's gonna want to kind of settle to the bottom at first. Going right in there with all my cheese. The camembert, I can essentially just kind of cut down, and I actually don't peel it. I use the rind and everything. If you got a soft rind camembert, don't even worry about it. It all dissolves in there. It's flavor. Unless you got like a funky cheese, like you may want to strip it of its rind. So I go right in. Gonna add my Parmesan right in. So I got my 4 cheeses right in here. Clean up here a little bit. And I'm just gonna whisk this all together. Get it melting. Yeah.
Are you using the rind of the camembert there?
I am. I went right in with the camembert, with the rind. It's a soft rind cheese, and like I said, if you can easily dissolve that rind right in here, and I love it. It doesn't actually affect the texture or the flavor. But if you have like a very stinky camembert or cheese that you're using, because you can use any type of cheese. I usually use like a sharp as the base and maybe some Parmesan, but then you can add in other cheeses. Some Gagere, some other French cheeses, even the American cheeses that we have easily work. But it's just like a balancing act of what flavor profile you want. Do you want it on the funkier end? Do you want it on the cheesier, creamy end? So yeah.
And while we're on it, Jacqueline's curious about how much of each cheese are you using here?
Yeah, so in total, it's probably about 1.5 pounds of cheese. The sharp cheese, again, this is like what I did is like a foundation. And so it's kind of on your take. Like you want to make it as unique as possible for you. So if you want more of a sharp, tangy note, go more of the extra sharp cheese. If you want more mellow, use the base as a medium and then add in other ingredients. And so I would say it's about 1/4 pound or so of the each of the sharp and the medium cheese, and then it was another 1/4 pound or so of the camembert, and then just a small amount of the Parmesan to bring that little sharpness, also that rich salty note to the cheese sauce here. And so essentially that's what I'm making. I'm making a cheese sauce, and other people can call it a fondue of sorts if you want to be true to it. And the magic that we do in the restaurant and what I do at home is like I have this beautiful cheese sauce here, but what I like to do is actually add it to a blender to truly smooth it out. It brings everything together. Those denatured cheese, that cheese fats, the milks, they all come together at this point in time when you put it to a blender, and it makes such a velvety cheese sauce. So I'm gonna go right in my blender here. And if you don't have a blender, don't worry about it. It can be as we call it, more rustic, more homey, more comforting. But this is what we do in the restaurant to kind of elevate our cheese. Okay, from here, you want to add a little bit of salt if your cheese isn't too salty. You can add in some black pepper at this point.
About how much paprika and spices and things are you adding there?
Yeah, so the paprika, again, this is foundation, so you kind of go with what you want. This was about 2 tablespoons of paprika. And that's smoked paprika. The pimenton is the other name for it. I'm just gonna quickly put this on the blender. My pasta should be about ready. I'm gonna give it a taste test. Perfect. I put my pasta in a strainer basket, and that allows me to pull out pretty fast. I don't have to worry about a thing. I don't have to worry about pouring hot water down the drain right now. And
we have a couple folks wondering if an immersion blender will give you the same result.
Yeah, absolutely. For the cheese, yep. You can just get in there, blend it really quick, and it'll be perfect. You don't have to mess up your entire blender and dirty up some dishes. So absolutely. I'm gonna blend this really quick on high. That's essentially 15 seconds in the blender. If you got any chunks of cheese remaining, any of the camembert rind, etc., all of it gets emulsified. And I'm gonna do this. I mean, you can see how it runs. You don't want too thick of a cheese sauce because I undercooked the pasta purposely so that I can have time in the oven with it. And so I'm gonna set my oven for 350 degrees. This is going to be about anywhere from like 15 to 20 minutes. You can do covered for a little bit and then take out to get what you desire. So I'm gonna put my pasta in a bowl. If I had a big enough pot or another vessel, I can just easily go in that way. But I can show you 2 different methods now for doing a beautiful pasta. So I'm gonna just kind of pour my sauce in here. And you can gauge it. I do want it wet because we want it to kind of help finish the pasta and really get into the pores of that pasta.
Chef, separation of the cheese sauce, especially during baking, can be a problem. Does the blending step help to prevent that?
Not necessarily. That happens. Sometimes it's kind of just it's cooking too high. You can cook on too high of a heat, so you get like the oil separation that happens. Is that what you're talking about? The question?
Yeah, I think we have a question from one of the panelists,
yeah.
And I can't see their name, but if whoever asked the question wants to provide a little more context, we can ask the expert while we've got him here.
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes it's the type of cheese that you use. Some cheese have a higher fat content. Where it is going to actually separate when you get that fat, the oil separating out. Also, when you're building your bechamel, if you're using too much butter or too much bacon fat or whatever it is that you're using, that can also separate out too. So you definitely want to be like cautious of that. And don't cook it too long. Just the pasta is 90% cooked. The cheese sauce is already ready. You're kind of bringing it together, so you can bake it for 10 to 15 minutes. Then you can put it on the broiler, and that way you don't have to worry about that separation. So I now have my base here, and so what you can do now is, one of them is going to be, let's just say, bacon, and then I can just start layering some pasta noodles in here with a little bit more bacon, or a lot more bacon, up to you.
We have another question. We're really trying to prevent this separation of the cheese, and Linda's curious if adding some mustard as a binder could help prevent that.
So mustard is a emulsifier, and it can help the fat stay stable. You know, it also is going to change the flavor a little bit. So if you're fine with that flavor, absolutely, it will help. I know some people also use eggs. You know, I find that kind of make more of like a souffle, souffle mac, baked like a baked mac, and I kind of like the cheesy, more wet mac. But you know, to each your own. You know, every family, every region, every state, every culture is going to have something that's slightly different. So you can change it up as you desire. So I have the bacon version there. I got some lobster here that I already cooked. I'm essentially gonna slice and dice. And who says that you can't have bacon and lobster? So if you want both, add it to the vessel. So I'm gonna add a little bit of bacon at the base here. Gonna add my mac sauce and pasta noodles. Gonna add a little bit more lobster. Gonna top it here. And so at this point, you know, I have my 2 vessels of mac and cheese. I got everything where I want it. You know, if it's not as wet as you want, you can use a little bit more cheese sauce at this point in time and make it a little bit more decadent. Okay. And then what I'm gonna do is just give this a little stir. And crazy enough, I'm gonna add in some more cheese to top it off.
My mouth is certainly watering.
So this is the smoked cheese now. So this is a cheddar that's smoked. I'm just gonna grate some over the box grater on the large opening. Get this over here. I'm essentially gonna top this. I got my oven. It should have been on. Just gonna top this here with some smoked cheese. And this essentially goes into the oven for anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. You can do covered for a little bit if you desire. You know, that's gonna heat it up super fast, and then you can put it on the broiler. I just like to be kind of like slow and thoughtful, so 350 degrees for about 15 to 20 minutes is perfect for me. I actually did a Magic of TV. I have one ready for us already. And this is just using the standard base with no additions, if you can see that there. And so that's the finished mac and cheese. And how I like to top it is just like, I like to put a little bit of herbs on there. So I'll get some chives. In the restaurant, we'll use like maybe country ham, kind of create like a rose petals of country ham that would go on top. So as it's coming right out of the oven, blistering and still bubbling, we'll top it with that with the chives, a little bit of onion notes, that little country ham just kind of melting over the top. And we have a beautiful meal here now. Any questions?
We've got one more question from Polly, who wants to know if you can make this ahead and bake it a couple days later.
Absolutely. So you can make it ahead and just like have that base ready, and then you can put it in a casserole dish and reheat it up and fully heat it up from start to finish kind of thing. You know, if one suggestion would be like, if you're going to cook it ahead, potentially cook the noodles a little bit further so that the absorption can be a little bit easier if you're going to do the bake a little bit later. But since the noodles are still hot right now, I'm pouring in hot sauce over the top of it and right in the oven. I just give myself a little bit more leeway to allow it to absorb in enough time. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Linda would like to know if you added salt to the pasta cooking water.
I did. Thank you. That's a very, very good question. Always season your pasta water because you don't want to come back on the back end trying to like season this sauce up or season like the finished mac and cheese because the salt didn't actually penetrate that pasta noodle. By actually having the water seasoned, and we're not talking about aggressive like blanching vegetable water. We don't want it to taste like seawater. It's just a good sprinkle of salt into the water so it can help actually penetrate that pasta noodle so that when you get every bite, it's actually a seasoned pasta. So very important. And yes, I did.
Awesome. And I know that you and Adrian, that Adrian wants to ask you a couple of questions himself. And we had an interesting question pop up that Adrian took a try at, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is it still soul food if it's vegan?
The answer is yes, because soul food means so many different things to so many different people. What I see soul food is, from an African American standpoint, you know, it was the food that was comforting, that settled our soul, that warmed our soul and our heart. But with new days and new ages, you know, I think soul food could be anything for anyone. And so absolutely, African Americans did cook with a lot of vegetables, a lot of plant-based foods. We're kind of, you know, the connotation is that, you know, we cook heavy with animal fats, et cetera, et cetera. Like, yeah, that was great when we can, but that was not a luxury that we had to do, use every day. So, you know, veganism is a thing, and it has been a thing, you know, throughout history. And so soul food is still soul food.
Yeah, I agree. I said that I think veganism is really a back to the future moment, because if you actually go back and look at what enslaved people are eating day in and day out, it's pretty close to what we call vegan today. So I think it's about the context. Okay. Yeah, just a yeah, good. Hey, just a few questions for you. So I think this is a burning question for a lot of people watching. What is the appropriate mac and cheese to serve to a beloved pet? Because we saw your dog walking in and out. So
all right, I'm gonna say this and everyone's gonna laugh at me. I actually am very strict with my pet because like he farts all the time. So I would never give him mac and cheese. I guess maybe a vegan mac and cheese might work for his belly.
Okay, cool. Hey, I'm just curious, what's your earliest memory of mac and cheese growing up? Was it a Sunday dinner kind of thing, like special occasion, or maybe a mix? I'm just curious.
Yeah, definitely a mix. You know, my mom was, you know, I don't know how my grandmother did. My grandmother had like 9 kids. She also had like extended family over, and she'll cook these big elaborate meals for Sunday suppers. You know, Friday fish fries, Thanksgiving, big old feast. And you know, that's one of my first vivid memories of macaroni and cheese. You know, the macaroni casseroles. You know, it's umptious, it's big. You can tell it kind of souffled in the oven. And you know, I always, you know, kind of filled my heart and my soul when I know grandma was making mac and cheese. And then the other version, and my mom gonna kill me for this, but you know, she used to use the Kraft Velveeta mac and cheese, or whatever the company was. And actually, I loved it because like that's what I also knew what mac and cheese was for me. So you know, I have like 2 vivid memories of what are differences of what mac and cheese is, and you know, to this day, like I can't compete how Velveeta melts, et cetera, because like it is processed, it is different, but I understand like the health aspect of making my own mac and cheese from start to finish, and I enjoy doing it this way now.
Okay. You know, did you ever have mac and cheese with meat in it? Because I read that old school Southern recipe. I just don't have any memories of meat, but I know that in a lot of Black cookbooks, I've seen that. I wonder if you've ever had that.
You know, honestly, I think that's a new day age thing. When it became a little bit more commercialized, when people wanted to sell more mac and cheese in restaurants on a commercial standpoint, that you had to elevate it to another level. No, we did not add any kind of meat into our mac and cheese. It was just mac and cheese. I don't remember any herbs on top of it. It was pretty much yellow pasta that got caramelized, just like your background.
Yep.
And we dug in there, and you know that was the highest level for mac and cheese, but it meant that it still was good, and that's the level that we wanted. So this addition, what I did with the bacon and the lobster, no, that's new age. And actually, I don't cook like that on a regular. This is how I eat my mac and cheese. But there are options if someone wants to elevate their mac and cheese.
Yeah. What's the funkiest thing you've ever seen on top of mac and cheese, or included? Like, what's the funkiest ingredient?
Oh man.
And if you say raisins, we're gonna end this telecast right now.
If someone says raisins, I'm walking out of that house. I'm walking out of the restaurant. You know, like that's some unique mess there. That's like a pasta salad with, you know, don't put any cheese sauce on there. I don't know. You know, honestly, I haven't seen too many funky things. You know, I've seen, you know, everyone's probably seen like the onion rings on there. You know, obviously the bacon, but I think the blue cheese mac and cheese, I think it was kind of interesting for me. And I actually tasted it. I'm like, I can't really get into this.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. You know, I was intrigued earlier. You said something that's been on my mind. I've been trying to figure out when mac and cheese became a barbecue side dish.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that when you think about grilling. So what do you know when that might have happened? It just seems like it's a recent thing as well.
I don't, you know, it's you know, you got your classics, but I have no history lesson on that.
Okay.
And that's why I was super excited to join you today, because I know you're a scholar, and I was like, send me that knowledge, because like my family never talked about the food, never talked about the history. So it's like everything now is like a deep dive for me of understanding why my mom, my grandmother, you know, my ancestors cooked the way they did, why they paired things together. So you know, now we got to do a little bit more research now.
Yeah, there's an interesting backstory there. All right, I'm going to ask you a fanciful question, then we'll turn it back to the audience because we got a lot of great questions. But all right, man, if we're going to make mac and cheese in Wakanda, how are you going to serve it up?
If I'm gonna make it in Wakanda, I guess I'm gonna have an antelope grilling on the side, right? You know what? I would not stray away from how my grandmother cooked it, and you know, I'm true to myself. In my restaurant, June Baby Restaurant, you know, the food that we cook is from my ancestors. It's from my history, and I try not to stray away from it because I want to tell that story without like this new age story. Like we've never put lobster in our mac and cheese in the restaurant because that's not how I ate. That's not how we knew it. And so I want, you know, I always just want to be as pure as I possibly can. So it'll be like a mac and cheese as is right here.
Okay. All right.
Come on, like who wouldn't want to dig into this right now?
Yeah, well, that was my next question. I was like, will that hold up to shipping? Because I would love for you to send that to Denver, but you know, I can't have it.
I got you, brother.
All right, Dan, let's turn it back over. So thank you so much. Good to be with you. One thing I forgot to connect the dots about when I told that Jefferson story about mac and cheese in the White House, he did have a white chef, but he had two enslaved women, Frances Hearn and Edith Fawcett, who were sous chefs. So I'm sure they probably had a hand in that mac and cheese as well. So I forgot to mention that. But let's turn it back over to the audience. So good to be with you. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
They got a foot in it, as we call it in the South. They put their foot in it.
Yep. All right, Dan, I'll turn it back over to you. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Thank you. You already answered one of our questions. It was about, you know, how did mac and cheese get associated with barbecue? And Monica has a question. How would it have been made vegan historically before? You know, today things like almond milk and vegan cheese are pretty easy to find, but before, how did that work?
Oh, I didn't mean to say that mac and cheese was vegan before. I just meant to say that overall diet for African Americans was pretty close to vegan. I can't find, other than cooking in the big house context, I can't find any, at least documented sources of African Americans making mac and cheese on their own during that time. But eventually it does get embraced in the culture. But yeah, so I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make that inference.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, Adrian. Like mac and cheese was definitely that elegant upscale ingredient or dish that was in the big house. This wasn't field food. This wasn't the slave food or enslaved food. So there's a big difference. And then as it trickled down, yeah, it lost its popularity amongst like the elite because they don't want to be associated with that food if everyone else is eating it. So.
And we've also been getting in the chat some love for the craft blue box mac and cheese, which is also kind of my intro. You know, I said earlier, you know, I think mac and cheese is like the gateway to pasta. You know, you start out when you're young with some Kraft macaroni and cheese and kind of go from there. I love it. And someone even mentioned that their mom used to make that Kraft mac and cheese with cooked ground beef. I think you're right. Like,
good point there. We had our like take on hamburger helper. So yes, yeah, there we go. That kind of brought back memories now. So yes, we did have
that. Oh, the hamburger helper. Wow, that really does take me back. You mentioned your dog very affectionately, and somebody wants to know what his name is.
His name is Doubter. He's a boxer. I named him Doubter for various reasons. He had a heart murmur when we first got him, and they thought that he wouldn't last. And he's now 10 years old, and yeah, he's an amazing dog, and there's no doubting him now.
Amazing. We've got someone from Switzerland sharing that that they add to the macaroni mix to, like, you know, spice it up a little bit, and using some Parmesan at the end for the crust. What are some other good crust additions there?
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly, Adrian. If you got more, I'm sure you do. One, I love to also add like cayenne pepper, and you can add in other spices too. I know people that like add in a touch of nutmeg into the bechamel. But for the topping, like, you know, you can do the bacon crumble, you can do the breadcrumbs. I am pretty traditional. I allow the cheese to actually caramelize and get its own little crust, and that's what I have right here. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say the breadcrumbs, but you know what? I had somebody do potato chips once, and I'm not gonna lie, it was actually tasty.
Nice.
Yeah.
Some Frito Lays right over the top.
Or flaming Cheetos. I bet somebody's doing flaming Cheetos too. Oh, one thing I wanted to make is just a historical note. So I mentioned that the early mac and cheese recipes were Parmesan. And so a lot of people are like, well, why do we do cheddar today? So if you actually go back, the early cheddars were very similar to Parmesan in terms of texture and other things. So it made sense that since Parmesan was so expensive a couple hundred years ago, that people would substitute cheddar. And then American dairy farmers got really good at making cheddar. And so to the point that by the mid 1800s, we were actually net exporting cheddar to places around the world instead of being an importing. So that explains kind of the transition to cheddar. I just forgot to mention that.
Yeah. And another note, like cheddar was white. They added in like a natto seed and other colorings to actually create more of that orange color that we're so familiar with cheddar now. So.
All right. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Let's see here. We've got Johnny Fishmonger sharing that he's always had mac with a lot of different versions, some with smoked wild salmon, razor clams, oysters, cured ham, asparagus. I love this idea of like the upscale, you know, the upscale mac. What's like the simplest, like most rudimentary, if we're taking it down a notch and you're just trying to be really comforted, like what is your go-to? What's going in there? Like
wow.
addition wise.
Oh, it's like the simplest version. Isn't it just the noodles and a cheese sauce, right? The roux and cheddar.
This is it. This is the foundation for a simple, basic mac and cheese that I do eat on a regular. Everything else is an addition and a way to upscale it. And mind you, like I'm not turning my nose up or down to like the additions. I would eat anybody's mac and cheese with oysters and lobster and shrimps and crawfish and all those goodies in there. I would do that. It's just, this is my simple, comforting go-to.
Thoughts on using other pasta shapes, shells, spirals?
Me, absolutely. I think you can use a variety if you want a certain look. You know, if you're doing a presentation, you can have a different look. I just like ridges on my pasta because again, it helps absorb it. It helps truly like coat the pasta. And so like, yeah, you can use the half elbows, the full elbows, the rigatonis, the longer pasta. Only thing I don't do is like thin pasta like spaghetti, linguine or anything. Yeah, that's a different. I'd probably be more of a wet sauce kind of pasta then.
Yep. No, I echo that. I'm like, go for it. I like innovation, creativity.
Absolutely. Carol's curious as to why you use such a deep pot, mentioning that, an au gratin dish might give it a little bit more crust.
In the baking or in the actual making of the sauce? It's
I think for the baking.
For the baking, yeah. Honestly, this is what I had in front of me. And so I use anything possible. I can use my cast irons where it is a little bit more au gratin, or you can use a true casserole, a shorter casserole. I love these here so I can kind of dig in, so I get like the the crispy top, but I also get the wet middle, and I get some of the bottom that starts to stick too. So, you know, it depends on what you want. If you use a shallower one, it can dry out just a little bit faster. So that, you know, that depends on what you want. You know, more of the what is it called? Macaroni pudding, macaroni casserole kind of feel. I still like the kind of classic creamy macaroni and cheese.
Hey, Chef Jordan, I have a quick question. At your restaurant, do you change your macaroni recipe, macaroni and cheese recipe every once in a while? Or is it pretty much a classic? And
No, it's staple. It's classic. It is tried and true. If someone messes it up, we know right away. You're like, oh no, start over. That don't look the same. The color not the same. It doesn't taste the same. I'm pretty strict on that. Like, I don't know. Again, like going back, you know, I'm just trying to be tried and true to things. Teach people about the basics and just good flavor. So start with good cheese, good noodles, done. And we make our own noodles. Well, we used to when we were open at that point in time, but we make our own noodles to make our mac and cheese. So
you're making your own penne?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we got an extruder.
Okay, gotcha.
Scott is curious, what was the Denver restaurant that's making those, oh my goodness, soulful mac and cheese rolls?
Oh yeah, I'll put it in the chat, but it's called Coryphes, and I'll put it in the chat.
Awesome. We have a question. Is there moisture on the bottom of the deep baking dish?
And there's no moisture. Well, I'm using a convection oven, so it's cooking on the top and the bottom and kind of rotating through. So if there is any moisture from like the noodles itself that, you know, went right in, or from the somewhat wet pasta, it kind of congeals, it settles. Those pasta noodles are still starchy, has the ridges, so everything is absorbing. So that is not wet at all. It's not going to be the same as, I can dig in and show you. It's not going to be the same as when it first went in. So I got my crispy top, things settled. So it's set. It's still creamy. You got your crunchy top. You can see that there. So that's kind of how I like it. It's not wet. I don't know if you can see the bottom here. It's still steaming, but it's also not dry either.
That's what we like to see, that dig in. Absolutely.
So may I ask an embarrassing question? So let's just say, you know, somebody else, not me, but let's just say it does come out dry. What's a good way to revive it?
Throw it in the trash. Oh, did I say that out loud?
All right, fair enough.
You know, well, my mom would say, you just start over.
Yeah, baby, just start over.
I mean, honestly, that's a solid advice. Honestly, solid advice. Cynthia, it looks like you have your hand raised. Did you want to ask a question to our esteemed panelists here?
Hi, Cynthia. Don't be shy.
Are you there, Cynthia?
I think she asked if there's going to be a recipe sent out.
Ah, yes, there is. There will be a copy of the recipe provided, so no worries. Let's see. Do we have any other questions, folks, in our audience? We've got just 5 minutes left before we need to wrap up. Someone has a question about your kitchen design, if you don't mind us asking, Chef. Do you like having the stove under a window? Folks haven't seen that before.
Oh, it's convenient because I cook on high heat, and sometimes my hood doesn't do the work, and I have to like open it up and air it out as fast as I can. That's, you know, the art of being a chef. You like everything's on high, everything's getting seared and caramelization. So I do like it. It also gives me like a different view than a wall when I'm cooking. So yeah.
Hey, I have a question / observation about just kind of the multiple identities of mac and cheese. You know, it's got like this high class vibe in some places. It's working class, almost like poverty food. Some people think school lunch. It's something comfort food. I mean, have you seen that as well? Have you just seen that it's such a versatile dish?
Yeah, I mean, it's super versatile for one. You know, it's the hands that touched it at the beginning. It's also how it's been commercialized. It's also how it's trending. So you'll see like a resurgence of like, you know, now the lobster mac and cheese is the coolest thing. Or lobster and caviar, mac and cheese and caviar is now cool. And then you got just like the homegrown barbecue. So you see these ups and downs and these ebbs and flows of mac and cheese. But you know, for me, this is tried and true. This is a Southern staple. This is something what I grew up on. And every time someone make it cooler than it should, I'm like, what are you doing? You know.
All right, cool.
We have a question from Mary. Do you put oil in the pasta water?
I don't. There's like reasons to do that. That's mainly when you're making a pasta salad where you don't want the noodles to actually stick together when they get drained out of the water. You know, with this here, I don't want to like coat my noodles with oil because the cheese is basically not going to want to truly stick to the pasta. So you're going to get that potential real separation where you pick up your mac and cheese and all the cheese is just kind of falling off of the noodles. So, or should I say pasta?
Mm-hmm. And we actually have a question about the pasta. When using freshly made pasta, how dry is it before it's cooked for mac and cheese? And do you get the same result when you start with dry pasta, just, you know, adjusting the cooking time?
So fresh pasta meaning an egg-based pasta that you rolled or an extruded fresh pasta. It's two different things. So
why don't you let us know about both?
I'll answer both. So if you did an egg noodle pasta, that's a super enriched pasta. It is not good for mac and cheese because you don't have much bake time. It's good for just like sauced up cheese sauce in a pan and sauteed, you know, kind of sauteed together, a little bit of pasta water, etc. But if you try to bake that egg-based noodle, it's essentially going to disintegrate in that oven. Now, if you did an extruded pasta and you have the honor of having an extruder at home, you still want to dry it because it allows like structure to happen. If you try to cook that pasta noodle right away, again, you're going to have that kind of same process that happens. It's going to disintegrate. It's just not going to have enough structure and body. So when you allow it to dry, you get a little bit of cook time in the pasta water. It gives you more cook time in the pasta water, which also gives you enough time for that cheese to absorb inside of the noodles. So I highly encourage for those who aren't familiar with making pasta to just buy a really good dry pasta.
Absolutely. And we are just hitting 12 p.m. on the West Coast, which means it's about time for us to wrap up. And I just want to say thank you so much for shining a light on the diversity and richness of this dish, you know, showcasing even more so, you know, the depth of soul food and Black food here in the US. So thank you, Chef, so much. And thank you, Adrian. I'm like already on your website. I'm checking out your book. I feel like we could all use more food history, especially Black food history. So thank you so much for coming on today, sharing your time and your talents with us. It's much appreciated. And I know our panelists are just our participants are just chomping at the bit to get this recipe and start experimenting. So thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.